Welcome back, guys. Today's episode, I am sharing 10 true Appalachian horror stories. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin.
I've been a long-haul driver for nearly 20 years. And if there's one stretch of road that feels alive in a way roads shouldn't, it's the Dalton Highway. Locals call it the Haul Road, but truckers like me know it as the spine of the Arctic. Every trip feels like a dare against weather, darkness, and the miles of nothing that listen while you breathe. It was late February. 2 a.m. The thermometer on my dash glared back 35 degrees Fahrenheit, my rig and old Peterbilt with more rattles than rhythm hauled 40 tons of fuel toward Deadhorse. Out here, the stars hang low enough to touch, but that night the sky was empty. Just a gray void pressing down, heavy and mean. My headlights barely bit through the ice fog. Everything. Past 10 feet with suggestion. The Dalton's a lonely road even in daylight, but at night it's different. The silence isn't just absence of sound, it's presence, like something watching from the tree line. The only company you get are your own thoughts, the growl of your diesel, and the occasional raven tracking your headlights. Somewhere north of Coldfoot, I spotted a glint in the middle of the lane, small, sharp, like dropped chrome catching the light. I eased off the gas. Up here, you learn to respect anything shiny. Could be ice, could be a nail, could be the start of a story that ruins you. The glint blinked. 2 points of light, far apart, low to the ground. My first thought was a Wolfbig one, maybe, but the spacing was wrong. They were too wide and too still. I coasted to a stop, my brakes sighing into the frozen air. The glow hung there, unmoving. I killed my high beams. The darkness swallowed everything. Then a shape stepped into view, and I'll never forget how quietly it did it. No crunch of snow, no puff of vapor, just motion. The thing was pale color of unbaked dough and hairless. Its shoulders narrow, limbs long and thin, too long for balance. Its head tilted, almost curious, and I swear it looked straight through my windshield. The ice fog haloed it, distorting its outline like heat above asphalt. I rolled my window down an inch, and cold air knifed through, carrying a smell that didn't belong to Alaska or Earth, metallic, wet, and sharp, like a mix of antifreeze and pennies. That's when something tapped the tanker behind me. Not a bump, not a slide, a tap, deliberate, once, then again. I jerked my head toward the mirrors, heart pounding. The road was clear. My lights painted the snow in a yellow cone of false safety. And beyond that, only black. The tapping came once more, closer, lighter. As if testing the metal skin of the tanker, I grabbed my spotlight from the seat and swung it backward. The beam caught only my trailer, shimmering with frost. Nothing, no footprints, no sign of a prankster or animal. I turned the light forward again. The road was empty. The thing was gone, but the smell still clung to the air. And in the reflection of the tanker's polished chrome, I saw something move slowly, like a smear of shadow that forgot it wasn't supposed to exist. When you've been driving as long as I have, you know when to keep moving and when to listen to instinct. Instinct was screaming, but curiosity makes you stupid. The reflection in the tanker warped with the frost. A ripple of pale motion, like a face pressed against glass from inside the metal. I leaned out the window, light trembling in my hand, and saw the fog bloom a perfect circle of condensation spreading from the tanker's side. As if something breathed against it, that meant it was close. Inches away, my stomach turned. I slammed the truck into neutral, reached for the horn cord, and the radio hissed alive. Static, then a whisper buried inside it. Not English? Not any language I knew. The voice was thin, mechanical, and wet like someone drowning while trying to talk. It faded as quick as it came, but I'd caught enough to know it said something to me. Not at me to me? The sound vibrated in my teeth. My spotlight flickered, dimmed, and then died. In the sudden dark, I caught movement in the reflection again. A long hand pressed against the chrome, fingers impossibly thin, leaving behind 5 black scorch marks where the frost should have melted clear. Each fingertip glowed faintly red as if heated from within. The hand slid sideways, dragging those marks like an artist smearing charcoal. Then it stopped, and the door latch on my passenger side clicked once, twice, then lifted. Every muscle in my arm locked. I grabbed the door handle and yanked it back down, but something on the other side pulled upward with equal force. Slow, unhurried, confident, I shouted. "Get the hell away from my rig!" The clicking stopped. The smell antifreeze and rot thickened until I could taste it. My breath fogged white. The latch fell back into place. Then silence again, except for the faintest scratching from the side mirror. Like a nail trailing across glass, I snapped the truck into gear and hit the gas. The tires fought for grip before catching, and the tanker fishtailed onto the icy road. Snow dust billowed behind me, swallowing the shoulder and whatever stood there. I didn't look back. For miles, I drove half-blind, every vibration in the trailer making my skin crawl. I didn't care about speed limits or logbook hours. I just needed to reach the next station, any place with lights and voices. But when I glanced in the side mirror, my blood turned cold. There was a shape in the reflection, clinging to the rear ladder of the tanker, thin, faceless. Head cocked toward me as if smiling, its hands burned black against the metal, and every so often, as the wheels hummed on the ice, I swear I could still hear it tapping. When the dawn broke pale and weak over Dead Horse, I rolled into the lot shaking, my knuckles white on the wheel. I'd driven the last 60 miles without stopping. The foreman's crew stared at me like I'd seen a ghost. Maybe I had. I parked by the refuel shed and stumbled out. The air up there is so sharp it cleans you out from the inside. But even in that deep cold, I smelled it again, that copper sweetness. It clung to the back of my throat. I walked the length of the tanker, praying I'd imagined it all. The frost was untouched, except near the ladder. There, clear as fingerprints, were 5 blackened spots burned into the polished aluminum. The metal was bubbled slightly, like it had met a blowtorch. "Exhaust backfire," the foreman said, squinting. "You probably parked too close to your stack at Coldfoot." "But exhaust doesn't melt frost in perfect finger shapes," he laughed, told me I needed sleep. I didn't argue. That night in my bunk, I dreamt of glass chrome reflections, distorted faces, long hands pressing out from the other side. When I woke, my passenger door was open an inch. No footprints in the snow, no sign of forced entry. Just that same smell. The next trip, I installed a padlock on the inside of that door. Now I check it twice before rolling. And I keep a coin in my pocket, an old silver dollar. It's the same weight as that first glint I saw on the road. The strange thing? Sometimes when I drive north and the fog starts to build, that coin warms against my thigh, warm as flesh. When it does, I don't look in the mirrors. I don't stop for anything, because out there, on that frozen highway between Fairbanks and the edge of the world, there's something that doesn't belong. Something that moves between reflection and reality, looking for warmth, for motion, for you. And I'll tell you this much on the Dalton. The mirrors don't just show what's behind you. They show what's following. I've worked halibut boats off the Kenai Peninsula since I was 19. If you've never stood a graveyard watch in the Gulf of Alaska, you don't know what it means for darkness to have weight. It's not just the absence of light. It's a presence, like a cold hand laid across the back of your neck. The gulls shut up after sunset and the wind keeps its thoughts to itself. The engine becomes your metronome, and the seawell, it listens. This was late season, the time when the tourists vanish and the weather stops pretending to be friendly. We had 4 on deck, me, the Captain Jarvie, who'd seen more meals at sea than on land, and 2 deckhands young enough to still believe storms are stories old men tell to test your nerves. We were running light to save diesel, dead sticking between sets and letting the swell hurt us. Around 0230, the baby waves quit teasing and the Gulf went to long, patient breaths. The sky lifted just enough for me to see the horizon, a darker line in the dark. I clicked the deck lights off to give my eyes a chance. It's a trick Jarvie taught me, kill the glare. And sometimes the ocean shows you what it's hiding. That's when we drifted onto the glow dot. At first I thought we were passing over a bloom of the usual bioluminescence, the kind that skitters like spilled stars behind your rudder. But this wasn't spray or froth or anything that cared about our wake. It was a perfect disc, electric blue, as wide as the boat was long and then some. It didn't ripple with the surface. It held its shape like painted glass laid just beneath the skin of the sea. Cap, I called, not loud because you don't shout at miracles or trouble. You seeing this? Jarvie stepped out, mug in hand, lit off, coffee-breathing steam. His silhouette paused in the doorway. He didn't answer. He set the mug in the scuppered grate so it wouldn't walk and came forward. The deckhands followed, their boots whispering on wet aluminum. The temperature dropped as if a hatch opened into winter. Our breath thickened. The hairs on my arms tried to stand under 2 layers of thermal. The radio, which had been murmuring a weather band about a low stacking up over Kodiak, choked on static and cleared like someone had lifted a hand from its throat. We all felt it at the same moment, the hum. Not from the engine? Through the hull, through the solace of our boots, through the cartilage in our ears. A low tone that wasn't sound so much as pressure, like the ocean itself was holding a single note. The disc pulsed dot with the swell against it. Our bow rose on a lazy swell and the disc thickened at the stern. Our stern climbed and the blue leaned forward to meet it. The shadows this thing cast made no sense. I could see a crisp silhouette of our boat on the blue, every cleat, every knot of rope. Like a blueprint set on fire from underneath, Jarvie tapped the bulkhead with his knuckles. A habit he picked up from some old skipper superstition about waking the boat's good luck. Nobody laughed. Sound the horn, he said. I did. The horn bellowed once, then came back smaller, like it had been swallowed and coughed up. The tone in the deck seemed to answer, a fraction higher, like a tuning fork finding its pair, then without a ripple. The disc slid under us. There should have been pushback in the water. Reaction to displacement, some complaint from physics. Instead, the glow just moved careful, deliberate, as if we drifted onto something with its own idea of where it was supposed to be. We stood in a row. 3 men and 1 kid staring down at a light that didn't belong to the sky and didn't care about our rules. The older deckhand, Pete, cleared his throat in a way that told me he'd crossed the line between curiosity and fear. I felt it too. You think you're ready for strange out there? Fog that talks. Current's that point wrong, but you're not for this. Reel up the slack, Jarvie said, quiet. Nobody drops a line till I say. We obeyed. On the Gulf, you listen to the man who's still here after everyone else's luck ran out. The disc brightened. And I swear I felt a look rise. Through that light like something down there. Recognized the shape of us the way a hunter recognizes silhouettes at dawn. It was the first time in my life I wanted to leave fish in the water and go home. Empty. You ever handle a net when the boat is moving wrong? The mesh develops a mind. It decides it's a snake, and it wants to coil around your ankles, your wrists, anything that resembles a mistake. We'd left our gear soaking in a modest set. When the blue disc slid under us, the lead line trembled, then went taut, not the jolt of a halibut's dead weight in panic, not the saw-off pull of a skate or a stray log. This was steady, patient, intentional. Hold, Jarvie said, hands loose, voice looser, which meant he was wound tight as winch cable inside. The hum in the hull rose half a note. The radio coughed out a single word from the weather band. Ashore, and then bled static like a wound. The deck lights flickered, decided to stay on, and then dimmed themselves to a softer glow. As if obeying we hauled the net came up shedding blue, each knot beaded with light. It wasn't water catching the bulbs. The light clung as if alive, forming pearls that slid along the mesh and dropped without splashing, like heavy fog rolling downhill. The air snapped cold around our cheeks. A cold that smelled faintly of batteries and tide pools and something sweet-rotted kelp, maybe, but cleaner, midway up. We saw it, a white shape inside the net, too big and too smooth. Door-sized, Pete muttered, but he was wrong. It wasn't the size that bothered me. It was the proportions. The eyes sat farther back than any halibut I'd cut open. The tail didn't end blunt with a square edge. It tapered to a soft point like a squid's fin. Skin pale as moonsand, not mottled. Reflective, almost mirror-like in the blue. Get the gaff, Jarvie said, already knowing we weren't keeping it. You don't keep things you can't name, I anchored the handle under my armpit and reached with the steel. The instant the point kissed that skin, the gaff hissed. The wood handle vibrated so hard I thought it would walk out of my hands. I yanked back, smoke rising from the contact. A smell like burned pennies riding the steam. "Cut it loose," Jarvie snapped. Now, the younger deckhand Rel fumbled his knife. It clanged. He swore, voice cracking. Pete moved faster, slicing clean through two lines like they owed him money. The net sagged and the thing slid toward the scupper. It should have flopped. Thrashed fish do that, even big ones. It didn't. It leaned as if considering the deck, then opened its mouth. No teeth. No tongue. Just a wide oval like a second eye, blue poured out, not waterlight, thick as milk, spreading along the deck plates, pooling in the low spots. Where it touched the scupper grate, the aluminum groaned. The glow crawled toward the bilge drain, choosing the seams, testing every path. "Use the deck hose," Pete said. I don't know why he whispered. Maybe because everything else was. I cracked the hose valve and blasted the puddle. The jet cut through spray and somehow through light. The blue curled, gathered like a living thing, and then raced back toward the fish that wasn't a fish at all. It opened wider to accept it, and in that mirror mouth I saw a quick flash of our faces of four distorted masks, eyes too large, mouths too small. The boat rocked hard to port. Not swell lift. Waterline rose half an inch on the hull markings. The hum in the deck turned into a vibration that tickled the bones in my forearms. Something below us under the blue was tasting the boat the way a dog noses a hand. "Cut the rest," Jarvie barked. "Let the damn thing go." Rel found himself and slashed through the final knot. The mesh fell away. The white shape slid, slow at first, then fast, like a letter being pulled under a door. The blue it had spilled hesitated, trembling like a jellyfish testing the current, then followed. For a heartbeat the deck was glassed in pale glow, our boots floating on frost-colored light. Then it drained, leaving only wet aluminum pocked with tiny black pits. As if something had chewed it at the molecular level, the radio clicked back to regular weather, gusts increasing by dawn. Small craft advisory persists. Like a bored bureaucrat stamping our reality back into order. We stood there breathing steam, ears ringing with a silence that felt earned. Pete crossed himself. Rel laughed, too high and brief to be healthy. Jarvie picked up his mug. The coffee inside had cooled to a skin. He took a sip anyway, made a face and said, "We're not fishing this spot again." No one argued. We didn't even ask where this spot was, because we all felt the same thing. The Gulf had a new name here, and it wasn't for us to speak. By the time false dawn smeared the horizon, the sea had gone back to ordinary black. We motored slow, a tired kind of cautious you only see after nearly being swallowed by something you can't put in a logbook. The deck told its own story, where the blue had pooled. The aluminum was pitted, freckles of corrosion that hadn't been there 2 hours earlier. Jarvie ran a gloved thumb over one patch and frowned. "Acid can't do that this fast," he said. "And we don't carry acid." Rel asked the question we were all avoiding. "What was it?" Jarvie said, "Nothing we can sell," which is Captain for drop it. Back at the dock, we kept quiet. The harbor has ears the kind that smell fear for the fun of it. I took a long walk along the pier and watched the sky lift from slate to pearl, the Kenai Mountains cutting their dark teeth into a thin band of pink. Beautiful morning for bad memories. I went below to grab a rag and found my hands shaking. That happens sometimes after close calls. The body holds the tremor until it knows you're away from the edge. Only this didn't feel like coming down from weather or near misses with gear. This felt like stepping off a moving belt onto still ground and realizing the ground was swaying anyway. I cleaned the scuppers. Blue stains lingered in the corners of the plating, not color, exactly an afterimage. If I looked straight at a stain, it was just damp metal. If I looked at it from the corner of my eye, it glowed like a coin at the bottom of deep, clear water. Pete came down the ladder and leaned in the doorway. He's not a man for poetry. His tattoos tell simpler stories. He said, "My granddad used to talk about lights in the water. Not St. Elmo's, something older. Said the ocean gets hungry for reflection sometimes." "Hungry for what?" I asked. Faces, he said, like it was the most normal answer in the world. Shapes of boats. Names on hulls. Things it can keep so when we don't come back it remembers what to miss. We didn't mark the coordinates on the chart. We didn't have to. If you fish long enough in one patch of sea, you feel where the bottom changes. You feel avoidance as a shape on your route. That night. Over cheap coffee and the kind of chowder you forgive because it's hot? Jarvie told us the rules going forward. No anchoring within a mile of where we'd seen the blue. No night sets in that quadrant. If any of us saw light behaving like it owned a piece of the Gulf, we called it and moved. He wrote none of that in the official log. He wrote about a fouled net and minor deck corrosion. Paperwork is for insurance and audits. The real rules get folded into muscle memory. I went home and slept hard, then woke up choking on the smell of battery metal. In the dream, I was on deck again, and the fish's mouth was an open door. Inside it, I saw places I don't have names for, cliffs carved by waves under a sun too close, a horizon bent like a spoon. I wasn't scared in the dream. That's what made me wake up sweating. Fear keeps you alive. Wonder gets you killed. A week later, curiosity made a fool of me. I went back alone before dawn, skiffing out along the same line. More east than the chart said to go, just enough to pretend I wasn't exactly retracing. The Gulf was old coin flat. No glow, no hum. The engine sounded like an engine again. The radio gave me the usual shop talk. I cut the throttle and let the skiff settle, drifting. Listening, then the water under the bow darkened to a cooler shade of black, like ink poured into ink. I didn't wait to see if it would bloom blue. I kicked the motor alive and swung wide, a respect so sharp it might as well be fear. Back at the slip, I ran a hand along the skiff's chine and felt pitting. I hadn't seen before 3 tiny divots where light had never touched. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I had brought something back on my hull that had already tasted me once and wanted a clearer bite. We don't anchor there anymore. Charter guys ask why. We shrug, say the bottom is trash, which is true in the most useful way. When young crews light their decks like casinos and talk about chasing squid trails and night bites, I tell them 2 things. Turn off the glare sometimes and don't follow lights. That don't belong to the sky. Here's the part you can take or leave. Every so often on clear nights when the aurora is busy up north and the Gulf lies heavy and listening, I'll stand stern watch and the water will turn a shade too bright, a suggestion more than a sight. The radio will cough a word it shouldn't know. The deck will hum in the bones of my feet. And I'll feel that same presence rise from below, the way you feel a person step up behind you in a quiet room when that happens. I keep my hands off the gear and my eyes on the horizon. I let the Gulf have its memory. And if a white shape rolls just beneath the surface, reflecting my face back at me in the softest blue, I look away, because some lights are lures and some mouths aren't for breathing. They say every pilot in Alaska has a story about something they shouldn't have seen from the air. Mine started on a clear September afternoon, the kind that makes the snow peaks look carved from glass and the spruce smell sharp enough to drink. I've been flying charters out of Talkeetna for 20 years, hunters. Surveyors, honeymooners, anyone with cash and courage. I know those ridgelines and river cuts better than the lines on my own palm. That day, I was ferrying supplies out to a group of climbers along the Ruth Amphitheater. The weather was perfect, barely any wind shear visibility all the way to Denali's shoulder. I remember thinking it was one of those rare, easy days the wilderness gifts you before it decides to take something back on the return flight. I took the scenic route east of the Susitna, over a patchwork of muskeg ponds and dark spruce breaks. That's when I saw the smoke, a single thin thread of gray rising straight up through the trees. It caught my eye because there was no road, no cut trail, no sign of habitation for 20 miles in any direction. The nearest cabin I knew of had burned down years ago. Yet this smoke moved clean and steady, like from a stovepipe. Not the smudge of wildfire. I throttled back, banking low to mark the spot. Below me, in a small clearing, stood a cabin-new roof, tin sheets gleaming dull silver in the sun. Birch rounds stacked neatly by the wall, a line of snowshoes hung under the eave. It looked lived in, but there were no footprints or tracks through the bog. Just the smoke, whispering upward. I checked my topo maps when I landed, no structure marked there. I even asked the local bush guide over coffee at the hangar. He swore nothing stood in that patch of timber. Maybe a trapper's line shack, he said. But they don't build new ones these days. Not worth the permits. I couldn't shake it. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe the way that smoke twisted like it wanted to be seen. Either way, I logged the coordinates. A pilot's habit marked the strange, in case you need to explain later. 2 weeks passed. The weather turned. By the time I flew that route again, the first frost had painted the muskeg white. Clouds hung low, pressing the world flat. I followed my old heading, scanning for that glint of tin roof. It was there, but wrong this time. The smoke was darker, rolling heavy charcoal plumes instead of pale gray. It didn't drift. It poured, like the cabin was trying to breathe too fast. I dropped altitude for a closer look. The clearing looked slick, wet, almost oily. The cabin stood crooked, roof sagging slightly, though I could have sworn it was straight the last time. And that same woodpile by the wall, it looked untouched, still stacked perfectly. Not even snow dash dusted. My radio hissed static for the first time all day. I banked hard. The Super Cub's engine rattling like loose teeth. And made a decision that still wakes me up some nights. I circled back for a landing. Curiosity, they say, is what gets bush pilots killed. They're not wrong. The vanishing cabin near Talkeetna, Part 2, the clock and the mug-eye put the Cub down near a frozen pond, on what passed for a beaver dam. The skis hissed across the crust, and I cut the throttle. The silence afterward was so complete it felt like a vacuum, no birds. No wind, not even the tick of cooling metal. I could see the cabin through the trees now. The smoke wasn't climbing anymore. It was folding back toward the roof like fog being inhaled. My boots crunched over frozen moss as I crossed the clearing. The air smelled of birch sap, pitch, and something else, something sweet and rotten, like old berries left in the sun. The door was half open, swinging gently. From inside came a faint yellow glow, like someone walking with a lantern. I called out. No answer. My own voice felt small in the cold. Anybody here? I said again. You need help? The light moved once, as if retreating deeper inside, then returned closer this time. That's when I noticed there were no footprints leading in or out. Just a layer of frost, so thin it should have recorded anything that moved. I stepped inside. The warmth hit first. Not the gentle kind from a stove, but heavy, wet heat like standing over an open oven. The air shimmered faintly. Inside, the cabin was neat, almost staged. A wooden table. A cot with a dent where someone had just been sitting. A shelf with canned food labels, new and bright. On the table sat a single enamel mug, blue with white specks, half full of water. Or what I thought was water. I reached for it. The surface didn't ripple when I moved. Perfectly still, like glass. I touched the mug. It was warm. That's when I noticed the clock. An old schoolhouse model, hanging crooked on the far wall, ticking far too fast. Not double speed, more like tenfold, each second slicing into the next. I stared, hypnotized, as the minute hand swept halfway around the face in what couldn't have been a minute. Sound broke it, the doorframe breathing. The smoke I'd seen outside began to drift inward, not out. It flowed across the threshold like fog rolling uphill. The light in the room pulsed once, like a heartbeat. Something clicked in the rafters, rhythmic and dry, like knuckles cracking in unison. The air pressure dropped hard enough that my ears popped. I turned toward the door, but it wasn't there anymore, not exactly. The doorway had stretched, receding into a hallway that hadn't existed before, boards elongating into shadow. The walls trembled slightly, like the whole cabin inhaled. The glow from the lantern, if that's what it was, flickered deep down that new hallway. Moving closer again, slow and deliberate, then came the whisper. Not through my ears, through my chest, vibrating my ribs like someone murmured from inside me, "Stay a while." Asterisk, I stumbled backward, my shoulder slamming the wall hard enough to rattle loose dust. The hallway doorway, whatever it had become, stretched further, shadows pooling into corners that deepened without reason. I could see something shimmering in the cot's dent now, like heat off tarmac. It rose, not quite solid but heavy with presence, bending light around itself. It wasn't a person. It was the impression of a mirage caught in still air. The form tilted slightly, headless, like testing which direction I'd run. Every movement came with the sound of tiny clicks, hundreds of them. Like ice shifting under pressure, the mug on the table began to vibrate. The water inside rippled once, then stilled so perfectly flat that it reflected the shape without distortion. The shimmer leaned closer. I could feel it studying me. The fast-ticking clock hit a shrill pitch, then stopped altogether, that silence. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. I turned and bolted. The threshold wasn't where I'd left it. My boots struck soft ground, and for a heartbeat there was no floor, just a sensation of falling through thick, cold air. Then my legs found purchase, and I burst out into the open, gasping as if I'd surfaced from underwater. The cabin stood quiet again behind me, smoke rising slow and thin like nothing had happened. I ran until I hit the pond, slipping on the slick crust as I skidded to the cub. The engine caught on the first pull. Too fast, as if it wanted to leave as badly as I did. As I lifted off, the tree line swallowed the cabin from view. But in the instant before the trees closed around it, I looked back, and the clearing was empty. No roof, no walls. Not even the blackened square where a fire pit might have been, just snow. Smooth and unbroken. Back in Talkeetna, I told the ranger. I gave her the coordinates, my map notes, the whole story, right down to the clock. She studied me quietly, then said, "Old hunting camps sometimes surface, then they settle again." Like she'd heard it before? Maybe she had. I flew over that area 6 times before the winter set in. Every time I marked the spot. Every time there was nothing, just a strange clearing where the trees bent inward, as if leaning toward something invisible. Now, when I fly those routes, I don't chase smoke. I don't land near unknown fires. And I never ignore my instruments when the clock starts ticking wrong, because I think that cabin wasn't a place built by hands. I think it was a door, and that day it opened to see who was knocking. And when it looked at me, it decided, not yet. I've given more Saturdays to the Tongases than to any other relationship in my life. Southeast Alaska has a way of sorting your priorities. If you don't respect the rain, the rot, and the old things that grow out of them, you won't last through your first season. I started as a trail day volunteer when I was 19 and never stopped, graduated to crew lead. And lately I've been that steady person who knows which cedar will fall in the next wind, and which boardwalk plank will turn a boot into a splinter factory. The rangers call me when they need a line, flagged where the map doesn't know the way. Yet this was a late spring project outside. Ketchikan short interpretive. Loop meant to carry tourists and school kids through. A cedar swamp without letting them drown in it. Boardwalk, low rails, a couple of signs about nurse logs, salmon berries, and how moss isn't just decoration, it's the glue holding 1,000 small lives together. The plan was simple. I'd roughen a corridor with highways flagging, mark the anchor points for hemlock stringers, and the carpenters would follow with cedar decking once the weather gave us a window. The Tongases always sounds damp. Even on clear days the air keeps a wet hand on your neck. That morning the rain wasn't falling so much as it was hanging there, beating on the hair of the Sitka spruce and collecting in the curled leaves of skunk cabbage like teaspoons left out for a ceremony. I moved slow, counting paces, looking for the driest possible line through the spongy ground. My orange ribbons popped against the green of breadcrumb trail for the rest of the crew. I tied a ribbon to a young hemlock, tugged it twice, stepped away, and kept moving. 10 paces later, I turned back to confirm sight lines. The ribbon was gone. I double-checked my pocket, still half a roll left. I must have spaced out and not tied that one. I went back, tied another. This time I said out loud, "There you go, little guy." Because talking to trees is less weird than talking to yourself if anyone hears you. I advanced 20 paces to the next marker tree and glanced back again. Gone. Not torn or fallen, gone. No snippet on the ground. No telltale shred caught in a lichen beard. It looked like I'd never been there. It's not the first time I've lost flagging. Wind eats it. Ravens steal it for the fun of it. and sometimes a swift branch snap turns a neat tie into a scarf floating off into the understory. But there was no wind, and the ravens were busy tattling on an eagle taking liberties with a garbage bag near the trailhead. I told myself I was being precious about tape and kept working, cutting a line towards a slight rise that might offer a drier route for the boardwalk. I tied a third ribbon and stepped back to sight the trio in a straight plane. As I did, I heard a whisper. Not words, exactly the shape of words without the consonants. It seemed to come from the salal at shin height, a rustle without movement. I turned, dipped, brushed my fingers along wet leaves. No source, the whisper shifted 3 paces ahead, as if someone was leaning forward to say, "This way," and the mouth moved with the suggestion. "Wind in the huckleberry," I said, as if naming it preempted any weirdness. I know the voices of that forest, raven clack, deer breath, distant outboard motor. This whisper belonged to none of them. And yet it also fit, the way a new species of bird can still sound like morning once you've learned its call. I kept following my proposed line. The whisper stayed 10 paces ahead, no closer, no farther, as if respecting the personal space of a human who would spook if it got greedy. The terrain grew older by degrees, bigger trunks, thicker nurse logs, ferns that had achieved the arrogant height of flags. The sponge under my boots took on that springy feel that says Pete has been waiting since before you were born to return your step to you. The smell shifted, too. Cedar pitch and loam gave way to a briny underscent that had no right to be there this far in, like low tide came to visit the swamp. I stopped, tasted the air. Somewhere out of sight, water moved with a heavy patience. The whisper paused, like it was deciding whether I'd earned one more hint. I took 3 steps. It resumed, softer now, as if even it didn't want to make noise. That was when I crested the low hummock and saw the clearing. I've walked that unit for seasons. I know the big roots that trip you, the ugly stump with a face you could draw eyes on, the snag that looks like a monk. I didn't know this place. Dead center stood a stump taller than me, its top cut at an angle, wet with a shine that didn't look like rain. On it lay 3 objects that made my stomach drop like I'd stepped through rotten board. One of my orange ribbons knotted into a tight circle. A perfect sand dollar bleached white as bone, and a cedar bark strip braided into a figure 8. The whisper circled me. No draft, no motion, just a perimeter of attention narrowing. I didn't tie another ribbon. I've heard stories from carvers and grandmas at fish fries about places you don't point at, trees you don't touch, bays you don't say the name of after sundown. I'm respectful, but I'm also the person they call when a bridge needs a footing and the footing needs a hole. The work is practical. The land usually is, too, until it isn't. The stump rose from the clearing like a pulpit. The top wasn't sore rough. It was plain smooth in some way I couldn't read, water sheeting off in a slow roll that never seemed to drip. The sand dollar didn't belong here, wrong coast, wrong tide, wrong everything, but there it lay, uncracked, as if it had always been part of this damp inland air. My ribbon, knotted into a circle the size of a wrist, glowed fox-bright against the gray wood. The cedar bark braid had been worked by someone with patient hands, thin, even strands, looped into an infinity that didn't slip. The whisper, still not words, made a small turn around me, like the eddy around a piling. I reached out, more to measure myself than the object, and lifted the ribbon. The second my fingers left the wood, the forest fell silent so hard I flinched. Silence in the Tongases isn't stillness. It's usually filled with trillions of small grazings and drips. This was an absence that pressed against my eardrums from the outside, a vacuum that tasted like copper and cedar. The hair along my forearms tried to stand under a rain shell, then came the voice, not the whisper now. A voice as big as the wet green around me, speaking through everything: the stump, the moss, the drip that should have been a drip and wasn't. It didn't feel like it came from a direction. It felt like it was the shape of the air inside my chest. 2 words, clear in the grammar of my first language, and in something older I recognized without permission. Leave the line. I set the ribbon back on the stump like it was a child's head. The silence loosened its choke. A white-throated sparrow dared a tentative note and then thought better of it. Far away, a raven muttered something rude about me and took off, wing beats not quite there. The cedar braid tightened a fraction, the two loops pulling in like a breath held. The sand dollar, this is going to sound impossible, seemed to brighten, not reflective sun bright, but the wet kind of bright things get underwater. Okay, I said out loud. Because worksite protocols don't cover etiquette with whatever this was. We can move the boardwalk. We can go wide. The whisper resumed, softer than before, like gratitude. It made a lap counter clockwise and then drifted toward the path I'd been planning to cut. The air felt denser in that direction, the muskeg yielding under my boot with an almost affectionate give. Something moved behind the stump, no footfall. No sway of fern, just a rearrangement of how the day looked. A shape leaned out, not a person, not an animal, nothing with an edge I could catalog. It had the texture of old bark and a height uncomfortably like my own. The instant I recognized the mirror of size, the shape leaned not toward me, but toward the space I'd intended for the trail. It didn't block me or threaten. It indicated. The understanding arrived like a word on the tongue. Not here. I backed a step. The ground reciprocated with a slight rebound, a mattress shift, as if the muskeg had been holding my weight and was relieved I was sensible. I nodded at a stump, at a braid, at the place itself. We'll reroute along the ridge, I said, pointing toward a string of drier hummocks I'd rejected for being less direct. No pilings in this bowl. No digging. We'll span with longer deck runs and float them. Low impact. Something like a sigh moved through the clearing. The cedar fronds lifted in unison the way grasses lift when a helicopter settles, then settled back. The bark braid loosened again, returning to its original lay. The sand dollar dimmed a hair, as if whoever held its light had stepped a pace back. I left the clearing without turning my back on a trail crew superstition. When you're around anything unknown? 10 paces out, the whisper walked with me again. 10 paces ahead, showing me a route along the ridgeline that still made sense to a carpenter and a budget. It paused by a massive nurse log furred with young hemlock. I touched the log's slick skin and felt the cool, long memory of rain and rot and seed. The whisper stayed put this time, as if to say anchor here. I flagged a distant tree instead, deliberately not marking the exact spot. If the forest wanted fewer ribbons it would get, back at the staging area. I rolled my tape back up with stiff fingers and wrote a new note in the field book. Sensitive area, cultural, ecological. Reroute North Ridge. No ground disturbance in bowl. Avoid piling. I didn't write the word sacred. I didn't write a voice told me so. But my handwriting had that upright, careful look it gets when my hands have stopped being only mine. When I looked up, my crew had arrived, a pair of carpenters with coffee and a student from the university who wanted to study human-non-human interfaces and had boots too clean for what he thought that meant. I handed them the new alignment and said we'd be running it a little peculiar, but we'd make it sing. The student asked why we were avoiding the bowl. I said, hydrology sensitive, and let the rain underline me. We built the boardwalk like a promise. The carpenters grumbled about span lengths and the cost of extra stringers, and then they got into the rhythm that work provides, the measured clack of mallets, the sweet-sour scent of fresh cedar as the planes bit, the satisfying moment when a deck plank settles flush. We floated the sections on sleepers set wide, distributing weight so the muskeg wouldn't pucker. I insisted on hand tools more than usual. Chainsaws make quick work, but the sound is a kind of disrespect unless you've earned it. The rain came and went. In the Tongases, it's another crew member. I didn't go back to the stump for a week. Not because I was scared, okay, maybe a little, but because I wanted the forest to see us keep our side of the deal first. We pinned our rails light, left room for roots to push, and skipped pilings in the bowl like it wasn't even there. The student asked again about interpretive signs. We'll have one about nurse logs and salmon runs, I told him. We won't have one that says, don't bother the old stump that talks. He laughed until he realized I wasn't joking about leaving certain stories alone. When the new line was solid enough to walk without a wobble, I went alone early, before the carpenters clocked on. The air that morning had a clean edge tied out somewhere, ravens practicing the gossip they'd spend freely later. I took the ridge route and stopped where the whisper had once paused. No sound now but the ordinary drip and the sudden metallic ping when a cold drop hits thin aluminum somewhere you can't see. I stepped into the clearing. The stump stood where it had stood. The top glistened, but the shine looked natural now, the wet of rain rather than the wet of something else. The sand dollar was gone. The cedar bark braid was gone. My ribbon circle remained but had shrunk. It had fused to the stump at 2 points. A fixed ring like a tree will grow around a forgotten wire. It felt less like a warning, more like a wedding band. I touched the stump with my palm. It was cool, not even warm. Beneath my hand, the wood felt dense with a quiet that was not silence, more like a full belly. I said thank you, because I was raised right, and also because it seemed stupid not to. On the walkout, the whisper returned just once at the exact place where I'd elected to anchor a mid-span. It brushed past my ear like someone passing in a narrow hallway. Then it was gone. I took it as approval and as closure. We'd made our detour. It would allow the traffic. That was our exchange. We opened the boardwalk to the public in July. Kids came with teachers and slid on rails they weren't supposed to slide on. Grandparents pointed out skunk cabbage and said the words black bear with the gentle terror those words deserve. The student came back with a clipboard and wrote his thesis sentences into boxes. He asked me whether I believed in the supernatural. I told him I believed in agreements. Every few weeks I hiked the loop with a pocket full of screws and a ratchet to put things right. I always pause at the spot where the trail would have crossed the bowl. It looks like any other patch of understory devil's club, moss, the low hush of growing. But if you stand still long enough, you can hear the difference between places you took from and places that let you pass. The bowl has the latter sound now, not silence, not warning. A settled hum like a refrigerator, like a cat's chest. Like the way the forest breathes when it doesn't need you to do anything but listen. Last month, a hiker came up after completing the loop and said, "Your signs are great, but you're missing one about the weird quiet spot." I smiled and said we ran out of budget. Then I told her to keep an eye out for the salmonberries at the southern bend later in Summerhow the biggest. Ones hide at the back where the light is more patient. She left happy. I stayed a while longer, checking the rails with my boot heel, feeling how the wood answers. Cedar knows when you've overstepped. It creaks differently when it forgives you. If there's a moral fit for a kiosk, it's this. Maps tell you where people went. Whispers tell you where you're allowed. The Tongass's doesn't need us to hear it to go on being itself, but when it speaks and we change our route, both of us leave lighter footprints. I've got a fresh roll of ribbon in my pocket still. Bright, easy to see. I use it when I must. But there are stretches of green where I leave nothing behind but a memory of the way. The air moved and the feeling of being trusted for as long as I did what I said I would. And sometimes, when the rain quits all at once and the world goes strangely wide, I swear I hear a thin voice 10 paces ahead, not leading this time, just keeping me company. Guiding the Ruth Amphitheater never gets routine. The place is a cathedral of ice and air, where sound travels differently and the cold negotiates directly with your bones. I've led a dozen expeditions across that basin, clients with new boots and big dreams, clients with good sense and quiet mouths. This run was a 3-day shuttle and skills clinic, 2 clients only. Theo, mid-30s, tall, strong, a software engineer who had conditioned his body the way he'd once optimized code. And Lark, older by 15 years, a nurse with the gait of someone who trusted her feet and distrusted her knees. Both were solid on crampons in town. The Ruth decides if that means anything. Weather looked passable on the flight in Denali, flirting with a shoulder through high cloud. Wind light enough that the pilot didn't talk more than he had to. We touched skis at the landing strip and watched the plane lift away into the light. That thin feeling in your chest when the only thing louder than the engine is the silence it leaves. Day 1 went textbook. Camp at the edge of the amphitheater, a foundation of chopped blocks and flattened drift. Kitchen trench sunk to waist height, tent guy lines banked in with snow. We practiced self-arrests on a safe slope until the habit felt baked in. Theo overcooked a glacade and laughed. Lark didn't laugh, but she smiled, and that's the better sign. We ate hot carbs, drank more water than we wanted, and shared the way climbers share gear stories and favorite socks. Not real life. That night, while the stove sang and the map lay open like a promise, I told them the rules for weather beyond the forecast. When the horizon goes away, you sit down. Whiteout doesn't arrive. It happens to you, the way sleep happens when the body decides. If it did arrive, if it had footsteps, they would be soundless. Morning was blue enough for sunglasses. Midday was glare enough to ice burn the soft around your eyes if you slipped the shades even once. At 1400, a front put its hand on the ridge and pushed. The sky went to milk in 10 minutes. By 1500, the world had one color and zero depth. No horizon line, no contrast, no shadows. Just white snuffing the distance, white eating edges. White like a door that closed over the amphitheater and latched from the outside. We pitched a hasty camp not far from where we'd planned to be. But the map in my head doesn't argue with the weather that owns the floor. Theo dug the tent platform with that happy exhaustion people get when the problem is simple and has a shovel for an answer. Lark stabilized the walls and set Deadman like she was placing IVs. I checked lines, redundancies for the redundancies. I carry an extra stake I call luck. Luck went in first. Inside. We moved into the ritual. Boots off, liners into sleeping bags. Stove vapor fogging the vestibule, meltwater fussed over like it was soup. The tent fabric thrummed with a steady wind. The white outside pressed in like someone leaning on canvas to see who was inside. The GPS glitched 50 meters to the north, then 50 meters to the west, then decided we were under the glacier somehow. That happens. Signal bounce and ice are old friends. But when Theo checked his altimeter, it had lost 100 feet we didn't lose. Instruments tell you what they know. The trick is knowing what they don't. By 1900, we had bellies full of noodles and bodies sliding toward sleep. The wind wrote its commentaries and the snow hissed its footnotes. Sometime before 2100, the first tap came, 3 quick. 2 slow. It was clean, close, and unmistakable. The polite knuckling of gloved fingers on tent pole aluminum. I looked at Theo, he looked at me. Lark's eyes were open already, pupils huge in the headlamp's throw. Spindrift, Theo offered, hopeful. I held up a hand. We counted breaths together, like I teach on crevasse rescue. Keep the tempo, keep the brain. 6 minutes later, right on the kind of schedule you don't want the unknown to keep. 3 quick. 2 slow. Not wind. Wind has language but not meter. This was pattern. My ribs went tight. I told myself it was Sasastrugi easing against the fly in the ugly way snow sometimes negotiates with fabric. I told myself lots of things. Liars don't know they're lying if they call it leadership. We waited. The tap came again. 3 quick. 2 slow. Same interval. Same placement. The white beyond the tent leaned closer, if snow can lean. The stove, which had cooled to a quiet tick, made a cluck like a tongue behind teeth and was still. I unzipped the vestibule. The world poured in without sound. Outside, the storm had softened into a mutter. The white had layers again. You could tell which way was up even without the mountain telling you. The tracks that shouldn't have held had softened, but they still read. 2 lines in and out. At the point nearest the vestibule, the shallow ovals overlapped. As if the unknown had shifted its weight while it stood near our door, we roped up. I put Lark in the middle because she had the best ear for rope. Music, she'd feel a wrong note in the tension before Theo would. I took the lead. I set a course that bowed safely toward the granite islands that punctuate the wisdom of rock in a world that lies. We moved like we practiced. Step, plant, breathe, scan. Step, plant, breathe, scan. The first hour passed in that working quiet that keeps fear from borrowing your hands. When the wind shivered, we paused and let it pass through us instead of leaning. When it went still, we added a knot to the stories we'd tell later without admitting why. Half a mile on, we crossed a zone where the surface changed color by a fraction lighter, a sheen that whispers bridged. My probe pole went down and met resistance where I wanted emptiness, then emptiness where I wanted hard. We gave it a berth. The rope hummed the prudent song. Beyond that, The glacier rose in the gentlest of brows. A choice we couldn't avoid. At the crest, the world tilted a degree I didn't like. Not slope sense. The amphitheater beyond should have presented a broad white bowl. My eyes read that shape, but my body read a kind of concavity that had nothing to do with terrain. Theo shifted his stance like a man about to get off a treadmill. Lark's breath hitched. The rope tightened a syllable and then slackened, and there it was, another line of prints. Not the pair from camp. These ran crosswise, laterally, a tidy seam of ovals stitched across our path at a diagonal, each one the same depth as before. The same width, the same indifferent weight. They came from nowhere and went toward a line of seracs we had no need to approach. If I bent and put my gloved hand near one, the air over the depression felt a degree colder, not in the way shade cools, but the way absence cools. Moisture vents? Theo tried, poor man. Engineers need the world to have an API. Keep your spacing, I said. Eyes up. As we stepped over the seam, the tapping resumed faint, not on the tent poles now, but through the rope. 3 quick, 2 slow, telegraphed along nylon, as if the line itself had become a string for conversation. Each pulse was gentle enough that it could have been wind. If you wanted wind to be responsible for everything you fear, we topped the brow. The light improved like a favor returned. In the first true dimensionality of hours, the seracs showed their bruised blues and stubborn grays. The snow bridges their slight sag where the tension surrendered to gravity for a millimeter too much. Knowledge came back in a rush. Here is safe, there is a lecture. And that part over there is a death story if you let it be. At the far margin of our route, I saw a print pressed up from below, not down. The snow domed from the inside like a hand had pushed at a white sheet and decided not to finish the gesture. It held for 3 breaths, then settled back as if embarrassed. Theo saw it too. We met eyes behind balaclavas and decided, without words, that some details don't travel home well. We reached the rock island. A shoulder of granite dark enough to set a lunch on without losing it to the camo of weather. We stomped a ledge and sat with our backs to the stone. The wind nosed around to see if we'd forgotten it. The rope in my lap twitched a single time, one quick, no slow. It felt like a goodbye or a tally mark added to a list I would never see. Count off, I said, because habit is a confession that works. 1, 2, Lark said. 3, Theo said. I waited, stupidly maybe, for a 4 from where the rope's 4th place would be if we had another client. Nothing came. The amphitheater said nothing. The wind said nothing. The rope, settled into the agreeable slack that means nothing urgent, is trying to talk through it. We ate hard cheese tortured into pliability by body heat. We drank water we didn't deserve to keep. We breathed and watched the light go wide, then narrow, then wide again as the high cloud tried on outfits. The walk back to camp was clean. The lateral seam of ovals had already blurred to a rumor. At the tent, the shallow prints, the in and the out had rounded edges now, soft like memory. The vestibule zipper behaved like zippers behave. The stove hissed like stoves hiss. The GPS had the confidence of someone who had been right all along. That night, sleep came honest. No taps, no rope songs. Just the regular percussion of snow against fabric and the stale comfort of shared air. In the morning, we broke camp and started the slow traverse out. The pilots promise a thin line in the distance you teach your legs to trust. When we reached the strip, the plane arrived into the kind of light that makes aluminum look kind. Back in town, I logged the trip. I wrote about whiteout procedures and rope discipline and terrain choices. I did not write about taps that keep time 6 minutes apart or prints with no feet. I told the ranger a sanitized version because she listens too well and I respect that. She said people hear things on the roof. People see things too. She didn't ask me to prove it. Proof is for courtrooms. On glaciers, you make do with counts. I carry an extra carabiner now beyond what the kit demands. It rides on the gear loop. I never put anything on because I like a loop that's free. Sometimes when the wind stalls and the world goes to white and the rope hums a note that isn't mine, I touch that carabiner and say the count out loud: 1, 2, 3, and then I leave a 4th beat empty. Not to invite, not to taunt, just to admit that once, on the roof, something kept time with us and let us go. If you ever find yourself in a tent on that amphitheater and the taps come through quick, too slowed, don't talk to them like they're weather. Don't call them wine for your own comfort. Check your lines, count your people, drink your water, and don't open the zipper all the way. Keep one clip free on the rope. Let the whites see you doing math you can stand behind. Sometimes the glacier takes. Sometimes it counts and moves on. I'm a field biologist contracted seasonally along the Quebec River corridor, mostly collaring caribou and checking on sensitive vegetation where the Great Kobuk sand dunes keep creeping east like a golden tide that forgot it wasn't water. People don't think of Alaska having deserts, but stand on those dunes at dusk and you'll forget spruce exists. It's wind and sand and a sky big enough to make your ribs ache. I've camped out there a dozen times with grad students and rangers, long enough to know how the dunes move and how they keep their own kind of time. I'd heard talk locals and pilots about the dunes, singing, that booming some deserts do when the grains are just the right size and dry enough to slip together. I figured I'd get lucky one day and hear it. I didn't expect the dunes to sing back early September. Shoulder season, mosquitoes mercifully thinned, mornings cold enough to frost a Nalgene. Our task was simple download data from 2 collars that had stopped transmitting and survey a fragile lichen patch halfway across the big field of dunes. We went in lean me, a ranger named Duke who'd worked the Ambler Road proposals longer than I've been alive, and Tanya, a grad student with a pack twice her size and a laugh that carried uphill. We cached our canoe, shouldered up, and hiked the spruce flats into the open the moment the trees fell away and the sand took. Over always feels like stepping into someone else's. Memory. We made camp at the edge of an old blowout where willows had their noses, buried in a pocket of snow that refused to admit summer had visited. The wind purred, steady from the west, combing ripples across the sand like a cat liking a carpet the wrong way. We set the tent low, guided like sailors, and stashed water in a shallow pit to keep it from freezing into inconvenient shapes by morning. I ran a hand through the top layer of sand out of habit. It felt warm from the day like bread cooling, a trick that always gets me in September air cold, ground holding a ghost of sun. The inciting incident wasn't dramatic. It was a radio check. Our sat messenger chirped at 20 o'clock with the expected ping. Logistics back in Bettles confirming our last coordinates and weather note. I replied with a thumbs up, a temperature. A mention of light katabatic winds, all good. A minute later, the unit chirped again, same message we'd just received, which happens when the network burps. But it came twice more, spaced a few minutes apart. Then a fourth time with a line added at the bottom I hadn't seen before. Camp moved? I showed it to Duke. He snorted. The way men do when they refuse fretting a new technology. Bounce back, he said. Or someone in Bettles is bored. Camp moved? I asked. That a preset from base? He shrugged. Don't think so. He squinted out at the rounded backs of dunes like sleeping whales. Maybe they got our last camp pinned wrong. But when I stepped 10 paces from the tent to pee, my boots skidded on a slope that hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. I looked back and felt my belly slide cold. Our tent sat on a small bench that had been flush with the blowout lip when we pitched it. Now that lip had slumped forward, a slow-motion avalanche of sand that had flowed just enough to change the angle of the world. We hadn't moved. The dune had. Hey, Tanya said from the willow pocket, voice small in the widening wind. There are tracks here. I walked over. They were crisp 2 parallel lines of boot tread the size of my own, spaced like my stride, coming out of the willow shade and up the slope toward our camp. They were careful track heels placed, toes pointed straight, no scuffing like a tired walker. Beside them, a second set, slightly smaller, Tanya's size, same careful pace. I lifted my boot to match mine to the fresher track and froze, the tread pattern. Didn't match any of our boots. Close? Yes. Same number of lugs across the ball, same heel shape. But the central chevrons on this track angled the wrong way, pointing back toward where the walker had come from, not forward like modern tread. The sand held the imprint like cast plaster. The 2 sets of tracks climbed the slope to a 0.5 paces shy of our tent and stopped. No turnaround. No scattering. Just their last perfect prints and then unmarked sand. Wind erased them, Tanya suggested, but her voice made wind sound like an alibi. The evening faded into that odd September blue. It makes colors think twice. We ate quick freeze-dried noodles tasting of salt and relief enrolled. Our bear can away from tent lines because sand likes to collapse under anything round. Duke told a story about a ranger he'd known who'd slept on a dune and woken a football field away, the ground having drifted under him like a conveyor belt. We laughed because that story's funny until it's not. Then the SAP messenger chirped again. Camp moved. No origin header. No signature. Just those two irritating words like a child tugging a sleeve. After dark, the wind shifted north. Our guy lines thrummed. Something hissed over the tent sand, skitter small avalanches as the dune surface found its angle of repose over and over. And faintly, somewhere out there in the open, a low, musical moan breathed. If you've ever run a finger around a crystal glass and found the note, you know the sound. The dunes were getting ready to sing. I lay there listening to grains speak to grains, the tiny landslides building rhythm, and told myself I was about to hear something rare and wonderful. Instead, I heard a voice under the hum, a contour in the sound that rose and fell like speech. It didn't carry words. It carried shape. A long rising thread, two short ones, another long, 3-2-3, like a tune a child might tap when trying to get your attention without admitting they're scared. Do you hear that? Tanya whispered. Just the booming, I said. Because names keep your brain glued down when everything else wants to move, but the booming wasn't. It was the start of the dunes. Deciding they remembered. U.S. and wanted to remind us of something we hadn't done yet. Near midnight, the sound found its voice for real. It began as a long, soft breath and grew into a note you felt in your teeth. Booming sand is not a breeze playing a tune. It's an avalanche in miniature, countless grains cascading in sync until physics remembers it can make music. The dune beneath our tent shivered, and the hum climbed a half step like a throat clearing. Duke muttered something about shields and harmonics, nonsense words meant to serve as comfort. I unzipped the tent, poked my head out, and watched our world vibrate. The slope beyond camp undulated slow like a living thing asleep. Runnels of sand loosened and slid in sheets a quarter-inch thick, arcs rolling downward and rebuilding their ripples on the way. Each slip added to the choir. The night sky was unusually clear for September. The aurora smudged a green band low on the horizon. That weird, beautiful hum rose and fell, and threaded through it so faint I would have blamed imagination if I were alone came a pattern. 3 loom pulses. 2 short, 3 long again. I knew it because I'd heard a version of it before in wires and rails, in a station that kept watch, but that was hundreds of miles away. Here at road sand, not steel. The SUT messenger chirped. Camp moved. Then again. You moved. Okay, I said to the black. Point made. We tried to sleep. That lasted 20 minutes until the tent floor gently slid east 4 inches and stopped. No violence, no drama, just a patient nudge the way a crowded elevator encouraged you to find a better spot. I sat up. We're relocating, I said toward the zipper, and Duke said, Now? At the exact moment, the booming paused as if to listen. Now, I said. We packed by headlamp, ugly and fast. No one likes tearing down camp at midnight, but I like the idea of waking up in a different topography less. We heaved our gear to the willow pocket, figuring rooted plants would anchor us psychologically if not physically. While we hauled, I followed those strange boot prints by lamp, curious how the maker had gotten to and from without leaving a return path. They led to the willow edge, then down the lee face of the dune in steps evenly spaced like metronome ticks, and then they stopped. Mid-slope, the last heel half-pressed into sand that had somehow solidified like fired clay. Hardpack? Duke offered, but he didn't sound convinced. I scraped the last print with a gloved finger. The edges were sharp. No wind rounding, no gravitational slump. As if the foot had lifted and the sand had decided it was done participating in gravity just then, something flashed at the corner of my headlamp silver gray, like a needle. I pivoted the beam and found a caribou collar half buried. Not one of ours. Older style, heavier, The kind people grumble about when they complain biologists don't have to wear what they ask ungulates to. Its serial plate read a number that made my stomach flutter. I remembered the report. 4 years ago, a collared cow vanished in the dunes transmitter, pinged once more from the desert, then quit. We'd shrugged and said dust or water or malfunction. Here it was, bead blasted by sand, the nylon cut clean through as if gnawed by something with patience and small teeth. How the hell did that? Tanya started, and then the dune answered, not with words. With motion, a sheet of sand detached and sloughed downward in a wave 6 inches tall and 20 yards wide. It rolled invisibly under the top layer, first a bulge, and then the surface gave. The booming note leapt an octave, vibrating my sternum. The wave moved sideways, not down like a curtain drawing across a stage. Where it passed, small things surfaced, a rusted tent stake, a cracked ballpoint, a thumbnail-sized bead of blue glass so cold the lamp halo around it looked like flame. As the wave crossed the willow pocket, the shrubs hissed like a crowd told to hush. Wind had nothing to do with it. Gravity had stepped aside a second to let another rule try the room. Up, I said, because instinct sometimes beats data. We scrambled for the dune crest, boots drawing little cataracts of sand that heeled behind us. At the top, the wind got its voice back, and for a minute I believed distance could matter again. The hum spread across the field like a struck drumhead. In the middle distance, on the back of a high ridge, a brighter patch bloomed and held moonlight trapped in a lens steady, not blinking. The kind of thing a tired pilot or a tired human might mistake for a promise. It wants us to go there, Tanya said. Scared enough to sound certain, the Sut messenger chirped. Over, just that. No origin. I tasted pennies a taste. I've come to resent in Alaska because it seems to be how the land informs you you're being measured. We sidled down the crest into the next trough to put one dune between us and that steady brightness. The moment we slid, the booming softened and shifted key. My lamp caught new tracks hours sketched faint on the slip face by our passage, then watched them soften as sand flowed upward against gravity to erase them. Not drift, lift, the grains outran the wind like. They'd been told our record shouldn't remain open. We angled toward a boneyard of spruce at the desert edge windfall that had surrendered and stacked itself in a broken alphabet. Roots mean friction. Friction means sleep. The buzzing in my teeth faded as we left true sand for a patchwork of moss and blow sand. The bright patch on the ridge dimmed like an offended eye. The dunes behind us resumed their whisper. The Sat messenger went silent. We huddled inside brush like mammals that had stopped pretending we were above that sort of thing. Duke muttered a prayer he later swore was sarcasm. Tanya drew her knees up and breathed too fast until she didn't. I scratched a line in the sand with a stick at our feet. Dumb as it sounds, habit from other jobs, other nights' hours, not ours. The wind visited, inspected, moved on. That's when the dunes sang properly, full-voiced. The sound deepened into something like a pipe organ and a freight truck and a throat. It pushed into my bones until my molars hummed, and nested there a pattern I can't call coincidence anymore. 3 long. 2 short. 3 long. It wasn't Morse. It was reminder. The land out here keeps books. We had walked into a ledger and written too much already. Toward 3 o'clock the cold reached that special clarity where breath feels like thin glass. The booming throbbed on, sometimes faint, sometimes right under our backs like a subwoofer buried in the sand. The bright patch on the ridge across the field held for hours steady, unblinking, a runway of desert if I'd been stupid enough to need one. I forced my eyes closed in 10-second increments, micro-sleeps alternating with scans of the skyline. On one of those scans I saw a figure standing at the crest where the brightness gathered. Tall, coat hem just below the knee, hands at sides. I blinked, and the figure flowed right, not stepping, sliding, as a face of sand slipped beneath it. It kept pace above a moving world without effort, like a man on a slow walk. See that? I whispered. Duke turned, followed my lamp, and shook his head. Tanya didn't look? Nope, she said, with the raw conviction of someone closing a door. The Sat messenger chirped again. A tiny animal's heart in the pocket of my parka? Stay above. That wording had chased me through other winters. I wanted to throw the unit into the hum and let the dunes eat it, take the conversation away. Instead, I held it like a hot rock and typed "acknowledged." My thumb shook. The reply bounced back at once, because sometimes the world refuses to be coy. "You moved?" "Okay," I said into the cold. "Then we keep moving." We edged along the boneyard, keeping one foot on root mats, one on firm crust, avoiding the temptation to cut a clean line across the nearest tempting slope. The booming dropped half a tone as if disappointed. The bright patch on the ridge shivered and swelled like a breath held and released. The figure vanished. If I were being generous, I'd say it settled. The way a post settles when frost lets go. At the far edge of the boneyard, a half-buried logjam formed a lane pointing back toward the river spruce, a dark seam we could follow by headlamp. We started down it, and the dunes behind us answered with that 323 again. Louder, closer, then another voice inside the voice, a high hiss, countless tiny avalanches agreeing to be a single thing. Sand lifted in a pale veil and drifted uphill toward us, grain by grain, like frost reversing. The lane we chose began to fill, a zipper closing from both ends. "Back?" Duke said, automatic as a reflex. But back wasn't any different from forward when the ground didn't care about our lines. I planted my trekking pole and watched it vibrate in time with the hum, grain skittering up the shaft and pattering my glove like drizzle. I had a stupid thought then that I was being measured. Diameter, length, resistance, recorded into a ledger that didn't use ink. We cut left, along a low lip where blueberry and bearberry clung. The boom swelled enough to make my hearing go soft around its edges. Tanya slipped, slid 3 feet, caught herself on a buried trunk. Her hand sank wrist deep into sand that behaved like water and stayed as water a beat too long before deciding to be ground again. She yanked free with a small shout and held up her glove. The palm was dusted with fine, glittering grit that smelled sharp and metallic and faintly sweet. "Like coins," she said, gagging. The bright patch on the ridge pulsed once, as if irritated that its offer had been refused, then contracted to a needlepoint and winked. Darkness took its honest shape again. The hum didn't stop, but it stopped aiming. The dune's attention slid off us like a cat losing interest. I felt my jaw unclench and didn't know I'd been clenching. We made the spruce line just before dawn found a way to exist. In the first light, the desert looked almost reasonable. Rippled backs, soft slopes, mouse tracks scribbling cuneiform at the edges. The willow pocket where we'd camped was half swallowed. Our original tent bench sat 3 feet lower than at dinner time. No sign of the old boot prints. No collar, though I'd tucked it in my pack. It was heavier by daylight than it had felt in the dark, as if consent changes weight. On the high ridge where the steady brightness had held court all night, we saw a smooth apron of flow where a slip face had migrated 40 yards. A whole end table of landscape rearranged while we listened. We hiked out. The canoe wore a frosting of rime as if it had slept better than we had. We shoved off into gray water, honest about being cold. When the spruce swallowed the dunes behind us, the boom faded to a rumor. A raven followed for a mile and told us 3 joke stories in a voice like a hinge. The sap messenger stayed quiet until we rounded the last bend and saw the village roofs shrugging off frost. Back in Bettles, I turned the collar in. The tag matched the caribou we'd lost 4 years ago. The office chalked it up to dune mobility, which isn't wrong. I left out the parts that would make me a campfire, cautionary bright patches that burn like invitations, boot prints that stop where sand decides it has been seen enough. I kept the sap messenger messages, those screenshots with no origin fields, timestamps that make sense only if you accept that the dunes keep their own service provider. What's the true part? That the great Kobuk sand dunes will sing for you if you stand still long enough. And sometimes they sing to you if you've made the mistake of letting them learn your stride. That sand can move sideways, uphill, and into pages you didn't mean to write in. Things you lose out there, collars, stakes. A portion of your nerve come back when the dunes decide the ledger balances. Not when you're ready. I go back, because that's the job, and because the place has its own gravity. I choose camps under willow now, on routes that have learned to bargain with motion. I scratch a stupid little line in the sand at my feet every night, ours not ours, knowing the wind will erase it and hoping the dunes will accept the courtesy. And when the singing starts, if a steady brightness appears on a ridge and holds like a held breath, I look anywhere else. 1 count 3 long pulses, 2 short 3 long, and answer under my breath, we're staying above. If you decide to chase caribou data into those gold backs and the night begins to hum enough to tune your teeth, remember this, the dunes aren't trying to trick you. They're reminding you they move, and if you want to keep your name, you have to move, but in your own direction. Don't follow lights you didn't light. Don't walk in someone else's boot prints if the chevrons point the wrong way. And if the sand starts measuring you, let it finish, then thank it and leave before it asks you